If you zoom out into the future and you look back and you ask the question, what was Apple's greatest contribution to mankind? It will be about health.
Apple's biggest contribution to the world is they invented the touchscreen smartphone, which has completely upended everything in the last 15 years. But it's a great sales line, you know, the best is still ahead.
Apple is on a bit of a health craze.
Something big is actually going on. I believe we're at the very beginning of the indispensable role of health tech.
I think it enables a whole new network of companies, a slew of startup companies to be able to capitalize on this data and help improve outcomes.
So if there's any technology company today that's well positioned to pull this off and build the trust of healthcare institutions and consumers, it is Apple.
It's an area that has not been incredibly digitized in the past 20 or 30 years like other sectors have been.
And there are some very good reasons for the company's move into healthcare.
Healthcare accounts for about 18% of US GDP. That is massive. That is one of the last remaining markets that Apple could actually grow.
The App Store created about $500 billion, so $500 billion worth of economic activity. Absolutely huge. And I think that Apple could create a market that is similar in that size for healthcare.
But while investors are applauding Apple's health focus, physicians are a bit more hesitant.
You know, young people who are monitoring themselves with these devices, driving themselves crazy, watching their heart rate, getting these alerts, thinking there's something wrong with them. They come into my office all the time, and 99.999% of the time, what I offer them is just reassurance.
We wanted to explore why and how Apple is growing its healthcare business, as well as the challenges the company faces.
Steve Jobs, a rebel and icon, dead at 56, father of four.
Tim Cook has talked about in the past seeing, you know, the Apple founder, Steve Jobs, go through cancer in the healthcare system and realizing that they could make a contribution.
I think Steve Jobs' imprint was all over the company, and the culture is very derivative of Steve. But I think Tim has always been very thoughtful about health. And so I kind of think he views this almost in some ways as his legacy.
The Apple Watch is seen as one of Apple's most important introductions into the health sector, but that wasn't its exclusive goal initially.
It was supposed to be notifications on your wrist. It was supposed to be fashion. There was a gold one.
And over time, the watch has become much more of a health and fitness device, and they've sort of ditched some of these other things because they realized that that was actually the most compelling use case for people.
But the Apple Watch isn't the company's only health initiative.
Our business has always been about enriching people's lives, and as we've gotten into healthcare more and more, through the watch and through other things that we've created with Research Kit and Care Kit, and putting your medical records on the iPhone, this is a huge deal, and it's something that is very important for people. We are democratizing it.
When you look at it, Apple spends billions of dollars every year on R&D. Right now, I wouldn't say the healthcare department or healthcare team at Apple is the biggest, but they can place a pretty big bet on it. And you can tell that they're taking it seriously because the COO of Apple, Jeff Williams, runs the health team.
We are going to keep pushing Watch forward.
Apple has 3 areas of focus when it comes to health. Hardware like the Apple Watch, software like the Health app and Research Kit, and services like Fitness Plus, Apple's newest subscription service.
You know, some people might provide the software, people might provide the hardware, which is largely generic or a medical device maker, but Apple can combine them all and kind of have a better user interface, which I think they see as their main edge.
All of these devices and services revolve around the iPhone ecosystem, and while iPhone sales are still the majority of Apple's revenue, wearables and services are picking up steam. iPhone sales have increased an average of about 4% quarter over quarter and about 2% year over year since 2017. Services have increased an average of about 4.5% quarter over quarter and about 22% year over year since 2017, and wearable sales have grown the most by far, increasing at an average of almost 9% quarter over quarter and nearly 35% year over year since 2017.
The revenue from wearables is already more than 50% more than iPod was at its peak.
The danger to Apple is that next year a Samsung or a Huawei or an Oppo comes out with something that really captures the consumer's imagination and they stop buying iPhones. That's the danger, and really investing in this health lessens that, because if these features, really catch on and people need them, then they stick with Apple.
Let's discuss hardware first. The Apple Watch is a standout among the company's health initiatives. Not only does the most recent watch offer ECG recording and heart rate monitoring, it also includes blood oxygen monitoring, which is very medically minded and not a huge selling point for the average consumer. Apple does not report revenue made from the Apple Watch alone, but wearables, a category that includes Apple Watch along with products like AirPods, contributed about $6.5 billion in revenue in Q3 of 2020.
The estimates of watches that have been sold are, 60 million over the years, 70 million over the years, and if the average selling price is around $300, $400, that's a lot of money. That's substantial. That's, that could be its own company.
The tagline is the future of health is on your wrist. And so I think they're being very intentional about saying that this device is not just a wearable, it is really about health.
Some of the biggest names in medical equipment include Abbott, Johnson & Johnson, and GE Healthcare. But Apple is not really competing with these companies right now.
It's way outside of their wheelhouse. It's basically an entire new kind of business. There's a lot of regulation there. Innovation is much slower for obvious reasons, because we have to ensure safety at each step of the way. And so I think that Apple is very, very unlikely to be making a pacemaker anytime soon.
Apple also provides software solutions like HealthKit, which was announced back in 2014, and ResearchKit, which helps healthcare professionals use data from Apple devices for medical research.
Their devices are used widely in hospitals. For example, nurses frequently use iPhones or iPads to track medication administration. I use my iPhone on rounds to look up patient data. When it comes to medical records, right now that market is completely dominated by Epic, one company based out of Wisconsin. There's a lack of intercompatibility. It's very difficult and expensive to switch systems. And so because of that, there really just hasn't been much competition and innovation.
That's where Apple comes in. Apple has a reputation of innovating a stale market, and the company has already struck deals with some of the biggest healthcare institutions to get health records on the Health app.
Well, I think the hardware ecosystem that they've created with the iPhone, with the watch, and I think ultimately with AirPods as well, are the tools that will allow them to kind of collect health data for patients and then build those tools for developers to create unique applications that help treat patients in new ways. And that's what's really exciting to us, is the combination of all three.
Most recently, Apple announced Fitness Plus, a subscription workout service that will join Apple's lineup of other Plus services, like Apple TV Plus and News Plus. Fitness Plus is taking on competitors in the health and wellness category like Peloton and other at-home fitness programs. And with the pandemic keeping so many people at home, it was an ideal time to strike. But Peloton does have a leg up on Apple.
Peloton has created devices that Apple hasn't created. They've got the connected treadmill, they've got the bike. And so there are some limitations, I think, in terms of how much Apple can really provide in terms of the level of experience that Peloton has created.
There are some unique challenges in the healthcare space. For example, Apple has regularly complied with the FCC for all of its wireless products, but devices that deal with your health have to answer to another federal entity.
Looming over the horizon is the Food and Drug Administration. And if you do certain things like test glucose for diabetes testing, you will be regulated as a medical device, and for good reason. If you get the glucose meter wrong, you can kill people.
Apple has many electrical engineers that can explain why this is completely compliant with FCC rules, whereas the medical people, they have to hire, they're building that team. It's a totally different ballgame.
The company has flown under the radar of major regulations thanks in part to its classification as a fitness and wellness device manufacturer, not a medical device manufacturer. In fact, the Apple Watch has a de novo classification under the FDA, meaning it is a medical device for which general controls alone or general and special controls provide reasonable assurance of safety and effectiveness for the intended use, but for which there is no legally marketed predicate device.
Apple really wants to say, this is your health buddy. It's basically a medical device. You need this to track your vital signs. But legally, they gotta be like, this is about wellness. This is about, fitness. This is about health as opposed to medicine.
So, Apple's relationship with the FDA is growing more complex as it adds more medically focused sensors. But some physicians are not convinced that all their patients need the information coming from these sensors.
There are definitely situations where, as a doctor, I appreciate and value the data coming in from an Apple Watch. It's when the watch is driving the disease rather than the other way around that things get into trouble. If you look at the distribution of ages that own an Apple Watch and the distribution of ages that have atrial fibrillation, they are inverse. So the people who have Apple Watches are the ones who are least in need of continuous monitoring for atrial fibrillation, and vice versa.
Privacy is also a concern, as health data is incredibly sensitive. Luckily, Apple has a good track record when it comes to privacy.
Because the business model involves selling hardware, they can make the argument more coherently that it's not actually in their interest to sell your health information to a third party, because if that were uncovered that they were doing that, then it would be a massive blow to their primary source of income, which is the hardware side.
I don't think anybody's going to trust Facebook medical records anytime soon.
The future of Apple's health initiatives look positive.
Having control of that end-to-end experience lets them do things that other device makers can't do. And I think that's why they are so well positioned in digital health, is they can collect that data, they can create seamless experiences for the consumer, and they can also let that data be leveraged by those third-party app developers that ultimately, I think, power kind of the next wave of digital health with Apple.
The company has already tackled heart rate, electrocardiography, blood oxygen levels, but there is so much more that can be developed. Blood glucose monitoring is something Apple has discussed, which has also been on the radar of some other companies.
This would be, a huge breakthrough for people with chronic conditions like diabetes. It would be, an immense story kind of overnight. I don't necessarily believe that it's possible because these are such challenging things to do from just a technical and scientific standpoint.
Like, this stuff is hard. This stuff is really hard, taking sensors that barely exist, and miniaturizing them and making 10 million of them that all work.
But whether there's any actual benefit for non-diabetic people monitoring their sugar continuously is totally unknown. Unfortunately, that's not going to stop devices from being introduced to the consumer market that do precisely that, and already there's several in the pipeline.
Products like AirPods might find usefulness in Apple's health and wellness lineup too.
I think over the long term, what Apple's device actually becomes is a medical device that sort of delivers treatment to patients, which is, I think, really the coolest thing that they could do with their ecosystem. And so an example might be somebody that might have depression or chronic pain. They could wear an earpiece. It could even be an AirPod that delivers a very small stimulation to the brain, and it actually helps treat the underlying disease.
Now, Apple is not alone in its pursuit of those healthcare dollars. Google began organizing its health initiatives under the name Google Health in 2018, and now it boasts over 500 employees. Amazon bought PillPack, a prescription medication delivery service, in 2018, among other health initiatives.
This is a $3.5 trillion market just in the U.S. A third of that is wasted spend, and it's that wasted spend that technology companies are going after. And it won't just be one technology company that disrupts, it'll likely be many.
But Apple is trying hard to become a global leader in health. The company recently partnered with its first country to prove that point.
Singapore is now willing to reward people for achieving certain healthy behaviors and meeting their goals by giving them money.
Apple announced it would partner with the Singaporean government to give resident Apple Watch users up to 380 Singapore dollars after 2 years of better health practices, like meditating, exercising, and maybe even taking a COVID-19 vaccine when it becomes available. There is clearly a lot that can be achieved in the healthcare sector.
It's a really big area, so yep, we're just getting started, I think.
People want to maintain good health, and the people who have the interest, time, and money to get devices or tools to monitor that health are going to continue wanting to do so. The question is just whether those devices actually add anything useful for the person versus just giving them more information to worry about.
Apple has entered a new battleground with its health initiatives. Peloton, Abbott Medical Devices, Epic Medical Record Software, these are all competitors Apple is just now stepping into the ring with. And it's still unclear who, in 10, 20 years, will be the winner.
I think that the advantage Apple has is obviously that they already have a really great and powerful brand in the minds of consumers. And they've got 1 billion people around the world who are using an iPhone, that platform that they always build on top of.
It fits in with Apple's conception of itself as a company that is trying to do good, leave the world better than they found it. Financially, it could be huge, massive, bigger than the iPhone.